The maturational period. One of the notions central to the maturational period was that the development of both intellect and motor function were closely linked to the development of the central nervous system. Exsc hypothesized that the nervous system was the main driver for growth. The maturationists contended that the biology of the child played the major role in motor development. Little emphasis was placed on environmental influences. It was believed that though the environment may inhibit or facilitate the rate of change, the outcome itself was biologically determined. The naturally occurring sequences of change were the focus of this theoretical view. The transition from crawling to creeping to walking provides an example of such a sequence, the trigger for the onset of walking being the development of the central nervous system. Twin studies during the 1930s and 40s investigated the use of early practice and skill instruction. These findings suggested that the degree to which twins were trained related to the rate at which skills were acquired, although the sequence of the skill acquisition was not altered and the non-trained twin soon caught up once training ceased. As a result of such an understanding of motor development, it was natural that educators would use age group norms as a means to describe motor development. This perspective was popular from the 1940s through to the 1970s and has been described by Clark and Whittle as the normative descriptive period. Although some researchers were still investigating the neural dysfunction of children during the 1960s and 70s, post-World War II researchers in motor development began to focus less on the underlying processes of motor development and more on the description of school-aged children's motor skills. The British Medical Journal's paper titled Clumsy Children from 1962 was one of the first to use a scientific approach to studying children with poor motor skill behaviours with no known link to any neurological disorders. Espenschade, Glasso and Rarick, all physical educators, investigated the outcomes of motor development in school-aged children. The standardised tests and norms used today are largely based on those developed from this period. Children were tested against the average performance of children of similar age and gender. Average throwing distance and running speed are examples of some of the measurements used to focus on the outcome of movement rather than the process and the production of a quantitative score as a basis for comparison. Keogh and Oliver used normative data as a basis for comparison of physically awkward boys. The performance on 6 performance tests, including beam balance, beam walk, standing broad jump, alternate foot hopping and simultaneous foot finger tapping, was compared to that of regular children of the same age. Later, Keogh, Sugden and Reynard and Calkins used a classroom teacher checklist, observational methods and a motor performance test to identify clumsy children. Little agreement was noted between the 3 types of identification used, suggesting that the validity and reliability of one or all of the items was questionable. The authors noted that the lack of agreement identified here precluded any definitive statements on the nature of clumsiness. During the normative period, the developmental psychologists were theorizing that each child passed through universal age-based stages characterized by certain forms of performance. Stages are passed through sequentially during development. The order is invariant, although stages can be skipped. For example, a child may walk without learning to crawl. This stage-like approach was similar to the early maturationalist motor development theories. Although maturationalists contend that the sequence of the acquisition of movement skills was invariable, the emerging notion that developmental stages could be skipped implies that the rate and sequence of development may not be linear or continuous. This idea was later further explored by the ecological theorists. The limitations of these stage theories relate to their broad, inflexible nature. Each child develops through stages characterized by an average individual. While relevant for most, not every child will develop at an average rate. The invariance of the length of time and onset of each stage has also been identified as a limitation of these theories. Some children may need more time to hone certain skills or develop the systems required to perform movement tasks than others.